It's been 6 months since Edgar Linton and Catherine Earnshaw have been married. And honestly, to all of our surprise, it's been going well so far. But as well as it can be, at least, so Edgar Linton was terrified of setting Catherine off. He's seen her blow up, he's seen her get sick because she blew up, and so now, whenever Catherine was in a bad mood, the whole house was quiet. Everybody gave Catherine her space, and because of that, Catherine never exploded. And when Catherine was in a good mood, Edgar would match it. And on top of that, Isabella Linton, Edgar's sister, lived with them, and Catherine got along well with Isabella. So honestly, these two newlyweds were really happy. They were in love, they were happy. But that ended because one day, one fine evening, Mrs. Dean was coming back from the garden when someone called her from the darkness. It was Heathcliff. Heathcliff is back. He has been gone for 3 years, but he's back. And the first thing that Heathcliff asked Mrs. Dean was why she looked so horrified to see him. Because honestly, personally, same. Thrushcross Grange was in a state of perfect but delicate balance right now. But then again, we all know that this book is called Wuthering Heights and not Thrushcross Grange. And Mrs. Dean knew that Heathcliff's arrival would destroy the peace of Thrushcross Grange. Anyway, so yeah, Heathcliff asked Mrs. Dean to go tell Catherine that he was back and that he would wait downstairs to see her. Mrs. Dean really didn't want to do that. She went into the house, she looked at Catherine and Edgar, and at the time they were sitting by the window, they were looking out, they looked so peaceful, and disturbing all of this was the last thing she wanted to do. But she didn't really have any choice. What could she do? This was going to happen one way or the other. It wasn't like Heathcliff would give up. So as soon as Mrs. Dean informed the couple, something sparkled behind Catherine's eyes, something that wasn't there in a long time. Catherine looked beside herself with happiness. And on the side, Edgar was telling her to stop looking so happy over a runaway servant. And so Heathcliff was ushered into the room, and he had changed over the last 3 years that he had been gone. Heathcliff had a glow up. He was clean, he stood more upright, he was well dressed, he had a lot more muscle now than before, and he looked more dignified and intelligent. This was for someone who was already handsome before when he was embracing slouchiness, dirtiness, and being unrefined, so imagine. The difference was huge between the two men. Edgar Linton was more on the slender, boyish side still, even though he was older than Heathcliff. It was clear that Edgar was at a loss for words. He had always called Heathcliff a plowboy, but Heathcliff was definitely not one right now. So Edgar was just standing here thinking about what he should call Heathcliff. And Heathcliff, he wasn't even paying attention. Heathcliff and Catherine stared at each other from across the room. These two rude kids looked like they were drinking each other with their eyes. And Edgar on the side, he was trying to diffuse whatever this was. He was like, we better drink this tea before it gets cold. So anyway, everyone sat down for tea, and they learned that Heathcliff was actually back at Wuthering Heights now. Not as a servant this time, because he was invited somehow by Hindley to stay over, which is a surprise to everybody because everybody knew that Heathcliff and Hindley hated each other. So after a little tea, Heathcliff left, but not before literally admitting to an attempted murder-suicide. Heathcliff said that he meant to come to take one last look at Catherine, and then he planned to go over to Wuthering Heights and get his revenge on Hindley. I assume that that's something along the lines of killing him. And then Heathcliff said that he planned to just kill himself. But Heathcliff also said that because Catherine looked genuinely happy to see him, he has decided not to do all of that anymore. It looked like Catherine really was distraught when Heathcliff left, and so Heathcliff apologized for that. Heathcliff said that he struggled through the past 3 years, but he only struggled for Catherine. So nobody was alarmed by the potential murder-suicide. Everyone was just lost in their feelings, and especially Edgar, who was not happy that this hot, dirty farmhand was talking like this to his wife in front of him. And Catherine was determined to keep both Edgar and Heathcliff. Later that night, Catherine decided that she was going to play nice. She convinced Edgar to allow Heathcliff to visit, and also for Catherine to go visit Wuthering Heights to hang out with Heathcliff. And in return, Catherine made sure that Edgar wasn't unhappy about this arrangement. She knew that Edgar was feeling insecure and jealous over Heathcliff, so she made sure to give Edgar even more affection. And all of it worked. Balance seemed to form again at Thrushcross Grange. But it wasn't long till Isabella developed a crush on Heathcliff, like straight up in love with him. And because of that, jealousy was formed again by not Edgar Linton, but the other Linton sibling now. It was jealousy and resentment over Catherine because sometimes on visits, Catherine and Heathcliff would go on walks alone, and they would ask Isabella to just go back home, like, hey, no need for you to be here, we're just talking, we're just gonna bore you. And Isabella didn't really understand the dynamic between Heathcliff and Catherine. They were besties. And all Isabella saw from her side of things was that she was being kept away from this boy by another girl. So one day, Isabella couldn't take it anymore. Isabella went up to Catherine and was like, you knew I liked him and you made me go away on purpose. Isabella said that she, Isabella, loves Heathcliff more than Catherine would ever love Edgar. And if only Catherine would just let Heathcliff spend time with Isabella, Heathcliff will see. Heathcliff will love her too. So Catherine didn't even comment on who loves who the most. I mean, we all know that both these girls would love Heathcliff more than Edgar, who was the actual husband and brother in this scenario. Catherine only asked Isabella why she would even like someone like Heathcliff. Heathcliff is a horrible, wild, untamed creature. Honestly, while I was reading the book, it sounded like Catherine was quite possessive with Heathcliff, but also she had a point. Heathcliff was terrible, so it was really hard to pinpoint why she was so against Isabella spending time with Heathcliff. Then this is the part where we are reminded about everyone's age. Catherine was only 18 at this point, so Heathcliff was probably the same. Isabella was younger than that even. So as these two girls were quarreling, Heathcliff walked into the house, and Catherine, she straight up told Heathcliff in front of Isabella that Isabella was in love with him. Catherine was getting all sarcastic about how she should step aside so that these two lovebirds could just finally get together. Isabella was, of course, mortified. She even tried to run away while all of this was happening, but Catherine grabbed her so that she had to sit there and be humiliated. And Heathcliff, the whole time he didn't say anything. But finally, once Catherine and Heathcliff were alone, Catherine was like, can you believe it? That girl? And you? And Heathcliff was like, ew, a Linton. But also, she is the heir to all of this if Edgar dies. So the deal was that if Edgar Linton died, and if he didn't have any sons, then Isabella would get the inheritance of the Linton estate. But Catherine was like, get your paws off the Linton inheritance. That's mine. And Mrs. Dean, who was there in the room the whole time, everyone's just so comfortable with Mrs. Dean. They're like airing all of their dirty laundry in front of her. Mrs. Dean noticed that Heathcliff had the same look of deep thought that he had before back at Wuthering Heights when he was planning for revenge towards Hindley. And so Mrs. Dean decided that something needed to be done. She could see some puzzle pieces that was beginning to form, but she didn't know what the whole picture was. Heathcliff, Mrs. Dean knew, was plotting something. So, when Mrs. Dean finally had a chance to go to Wuthering Heights for the first time since she went away, it's been about 10 months at this point, she decided that since she could come, she was just going to start warning people in there. The first person she saw when she arrived was Hareton. That's the little boy she nursed since birth, that little toddler who clung to her all day, every day, and all they had was each other at the time in a very toxic household until they were ripped apart from each other. Mrs. Dean saw Hareton from the distance, and he looked almost the same since she has left him. And Mrs. Dean rushed to him, saying, "I'm back!" But Hareton didn't recognize her anymore. He just threw rocks at her and started cursing at her. And the way that he cursed at her didn't really sound like he understood the words themselves. It sounded like he was just repeating something that he heard from other grown-ups. And so Mrs. Dean asked Hareton how he learned those words. It was Heathcliff. Heathcliff taught Hareton how to curse, especially how to curse at his own father. Hareton had apparently stopped schooling. Heathcliff had drove that tutor away. And Mrs. Dean also learned from Joseph that Heathcliff had actually been lending Hindley money. That's why he was welcome to stay at Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff somehow had money now, and Hindley had been gambling and drinking himself away. So a few more pieces to the puzzle was forming. The way that Hareton had stopped schooling, the way that Hareton was now rough and vulgar, that seemed oddly similar to how Hindley forced Heathcliff to grow up many years ago. It looked like Heathcliff had found a different way to get his revenge on Hindley. The next time that Mrs. Dean saw Heathcliff was through a window. She was back at Thrushcross Grange, and she saw Heathcliff and Isabella outside. They were just talking, and suddenly they embraced. Now, embracing was scandalous at that point in time, and Mrs. Dean was shocked. She was yelling at the window from far away, and Catherine heard her from inside the house. Catherine looked out the window and saw everything too, and Catherine rushed outside of the house and blew up at Heathcliff. Isabella at this point had already ran away after she realized that they've been found out. Catherine started to interrogate Heathcliff. She was like, okay, who came on to who? And Heathcliff, he basically said that it was none of Catherine's business. He wasn't Catherine's husband, so she didn't have to be jealous. And so started this back and forth between Heathcliff and Catherine. Catherine was like, I'm not jealous. If Heathcliff truly liked Isabella, then go get married. She would support it. But Catherine said she knew that Heathcliff didn't even like Isabella. And then I don't know how to take this because Heathcliff kind of confessed to Catherine. He basically said that he would go and cut his throat if he truly believed that Catherine wanted him to marry Isabella. But he said that this was all for revenge. His revenge. He was treated infernally by everyone around him, including Catherine, and while he didn't really have the heart to get revenge on Catherine, just let him have some fun. Just let him get revenge on everyone else. At this point, Mrs. Dean was like, this conversation is going a little too far. I feel like these two people are about to profess their love to each other. She went up to look for Edgar and told him everything that was happening downstairs, including the part where Heathcliff and Isabella did some physically unacceptable thing. So naturally, Edgar was furious. He rushed down to find the two, Catherine and Heathcliff, still fighting. And Edgar just wanted Heathcliff to leave. He heard how Heathcliff was talking to Catherine, and he asked Catherine why she would let this classless, pathetic farmhand talk to her like that. But all Catherine said back was whether Edgar had been listening at the door. a little bit of gaslighting, if you will. And then Heathcliff laughed at Edgar. Heathcliff said that if only Edgar was worth beating up, but he wasn't. So Edgar was like, alrighty then. He asked Mrs. Dean to fetch the servants to come beat Heathcliff up. But Catherine was like, no way. Catherine didn't like that. Remember all of those years before when Catherine told Edgar and Isabella Linton that she never liked it when Heathcliff got beat up. So Catherine ran at Mrs. Dean. She grabbed her and locked the door so that Mrs. Dean couldn't get out. And then Catherine turned on Edgar. She said that if you really wanted to beat Heathcliff, then go beat him up yourself. And then Catherine slapped Edgar with an Uno reverse card. She was offended that Edgar would talk to her like that. She was defending Isabella's honor, but then Edgar would just come in here and talk to her like that. Catherine said that she wished Heathcliff would beat Edgar up. Edgar tried to wrestle the key to the door from Catherine because he knew that if he tried to beat Heathcliff up, he would lose. And Catherine, she just threw the key to the door into the fireplace. And so now Edgar can't get out, and Edgar grew pale in the face of having to beat Heathcliff up himself. He was so humiliated, he couldn't do it. He ended up sinking into a chair and covering his face. And Catherine and Heathcliff, they made fun of him. They laughed at him, and Heathcliff even pushed Edgar's chair. But that was the last straw. Edgar jumped up in a flash and punched Heathcliff right in the throat. And after that, Edgar calmly walked out another door. Apparently there was another door all along, guys. He walked out to call the servants to get Heathcliff out of the property. Catherine begged Heathcliff to escape because they didn't know the servants could come and beat Heathcliff up even more. Heathcliff didn't want to go, but he eventually did. And Catherine ran upstairs to try to get away from Edgar. She was very worked up now. She was upset, and she asked Mrs. Dean to go with her. Upstairs, Catherine told Mrs. Dean to tell Edgar that she is now on the verge of being sick, even if she wasn't. Catherine said that she wanted to frighten Edgar. She felt wronged. She was persuading Heathcliff all along to forget about Isabella, and if Edgar just hadn't listened at the door, everything would have been fine. But now everything's ruined because of those two boys. And now, because of all of this, if it ends up that she and Heathcliff cannot be friends anymore, she would break those two boys' hearts by breaking her own. Which means she will self-harm in some way to make everyone feel bad. Catherine asked Mrs. Dean to remind everyone that she cannot be provoked in any way because it would make her sick. And Mrs. Dean was just standing there unbothered. She had seen Catherine play nice over the past year. Catherine can behave if she wants to. The next thing they knew, Edgar came into the room. Edgar was calm, and Mrs. Dean left the room to give them a little bit of privacy. But also, she stayed at the door to listen, so we all love Mrs. Dean for that. Catherine just basically yelled at Edgar to just go away. But Edgar asked her to just hear him out. There was no anger in his voice anymore. He called her out too, actually. He was like, don't act like that. Don't act hysterical. I know you can be calm if you wanted to. But now you have to choose me or Heathcliff. Catherine grew even more hysterical. She was not getting her way. She was like, can't you see? I can't even stand anymore. I'm shaking. Just leave me alone. Catherine started ringing her bell for someone to come get her. She rang that bell so violently, it broke. And Mrs. Dean, she took her sweet time coming into the room. She was still unbothered. She was not going to give in to this little child throwing a tantrum. And when she came in, Catherine was banging her head on the armrest of a sofa. She was grinding her teeth so hard that Mrs. Dean thought they were going to splinter. Meanwhile, Edgar on the side, he was starting to become afraid. He asked Mrs. Dean to grab a glass of water, and they gave that glass to Catherine. But Catherine was hyperventilating now. Imagine a child throwing a tantrum. Catherine couldn't even drink the water. So Mrs. Dean, she just sprinkled some water on Catherine's face, still unbothered. And then Catherine rolled her eyes up so it was just white, and then she sank into a seat like she just passed out. There was even blood on her lips because she fully bit herself. Edgar was, of course, terrified. But Mrs. Dean told him to calm down. Mrs. Dean was Team Edgar. She didn't want Edgar to give in to all of this. Mrs. Dean loudly told Edgar about what Catherine just told her before he came into the room, which was basically pretending to be sick to scare Edgar. And with that, Catherine, who was supposedly all fainted on a seat, she bounced up because obviously she's not passed out. She glared at Mrs. Dean, and Mrs. Dean in that moment, she accepted the fate that she was going to have broken bones in the next few seconds. But all Catherine did was glare at Mrs. Dean some more, and then she stomped out of the room and locked herself in her bedroom. And so, the Battle of Pride has started. Catherine refused to come out of her room, and she has refused to eat. Her husband, Edgar, spent all day every day in the library. He was staring at books that he didn't even read, and he didn't ask anyone what Catherine was doing. He didn't even know that Catherine was on a hunger strike. But honestly, after that stunt she pulled the other night about pretending to be sick and make him worry about her, who could blame him? But still, Edgar and Catherine both just wanted the other to give in first and apologize. But pride from both ends didn't let that happen. Catherine was at a disadvantage though, because she wasn't eating. Girl wasn't eating. At this point, she hasn't eaten in 2 days. Eventually, she had to come out of her room, and that was on the 3rd day. She called to Mrs. Dean and asked for some food. She also asked Mrs. Dean to let Edgar know that Catherine thinks she was dying. But Mrs. Dean, of course, didn't tell Edgar. She's still the unbothered queen. She was like, this girl is still at it. It's the 3rd day. And so she didn't tell Edgar. But she did bring Catherine some tea and a piece of dry toast. Catherine devoured that piece of toast, and right after that, she flung herself and started wailing about how she wished she hadn't eaten that piece of toast. She said she wished she could just die because no one cares about her anyway. And Mrs. Dean, yet again, she was still unbothered. She was like, so did you want anything else? And Catherine was like, I want my husband to know that I'm dying. Can't you tell him that? Can't you tell him that you're sure I'm about to die? Does he not care about me anymore? Mrs. Dean wanted to antagonize Catherine even further. She just truthfully said that Edgar Linton had been in the library the past few days, and he didn't even know that Catherine had been too upset to eat. And besides, what's the point of telling him now, because literally Catherine just ate? She'll be fine tomorrow, Mrs. Dean said. It's all good. So Mrs. Dean meant to say all that to teach Catherine a lesson. Like, don't be playing mind games. But that was it for Catherine. Catherine thought everyone in the house adored her, but she's starting to realize that Mrs. Dean actually doesn't like her, and maybe everyone in the house didn't like her too. But the worst of it was that Mrs. Dean had convinced Catherine that Edgar had been unbothered this whole time. He's been reading books this whole time. Catherine thought she was dying. And with that thought, something took over Catherine. Or maybe something broke. Catherine just couldn't take it. She bit into her pillow and tore it with her teeth, like literally shredded her pillow. And so feathers started to fly around the room. Catherine picked up some of the feathers and lined them up on the bed. She was naming which bird each feather belonged to. She was like a little girl. She was saying, oh, this feather's from a turkey, this bird's from a pigeon. And then she started to talk gibberish. Mrs. Dean couldn't even understand her. It was truly unintelligible in the book too. I couldn't really string the thoughts together. And then Catherine noticed her reflection in the mirror, and she didn't recognize herself. She started to become afraid of her own reflection. And then she suddenly said that she thought she was just at Wuthering Heights just now, and how she wished she could go back there. Catherine then yanked open the window, and at this point it was in the middle of winter, so the open window was just blasting cold wind into the room. But Catherine leaned out of the window. She was yelling into the night air. It was completely dark out there, by the way. You couldn't see anything out there. But Catherine pointed to the distance and said, see? That candle in the window is my room at Wuthering Heights. And that candle is Joseph's candle in his room. Catherine started talking to Heathcliff as if he was just out there out the window. She was daring him to walk through the graveyard as if they were still little kids. Heathcliff wasn't even there. She was just yelling into the night. Catherine even said that when she dies, they could bury her 12 feet deep, but she would never rest until Heathcliff was with her. Suddenly, the door opened. It was Edgar. He was walking past the room, and maybe he heard some voices inside and finally decided to set aside his pride and be the one to break the ice. But what he saw horrified him. It really looked like something was wrong with Catherine this time. And Mrs. Dean knew that too. Mrs. Dean was afraid. She hurriedly explained that Catherine hasn't eaten in 2 days, and Edgar was furious for not being told that Catherine had been starving herself this whole time. Edgar grabbed Catherine. Catherine was just staring off into space, and Edgar's presence barely registered to her at first. Finally, she noticed Edgar was right there holding her, and she said, oh, you're sorry now? Well, it's too late because it's not going to change the fact that I'll be dead before spring is over. Go back to your books. I'm glad you have books to comfort you. Edgar was, of course, devastated. He held on to Catherine while Mrs. Dean went to get Dr. Kenneth. On her way out the door, Mrs. Dean noticed that, and this is disgusting. Mrs. Dean noticed that Isabella's puppy was dangling on a handkerchief. The handkerchief was hanging on a hook, and the puppy was maybe on the brink of getting suffocated, choked. But thankfully, Mrs. Dean grabbed the puppy and set it on the floor. Mrs. Dean was like, what's going on? There's no one here. How did Isabella's puppy get here? But at the same time, Mrs. Dean thought she heard hooves galloping away from Thrushcross Grange. Mrs. Dean didn't have time to process any of this. She had to call the doctor to see Catherine. And the doctor, after inspecting Catherine, reminded everyone to please not trigger Catherine anymore. Anything more than this, it wasn't death, but it would mean that Catherine would be mentally incapacitated. And Dr. Kenneth's a little gossip too. You can tell that the town has been talking about the 2 weird houses out on the moors. So Dr. Kenneth asked Mrs. Dean what caused Catherine to go hysterical. And Mrs. Dean at first, she was saying it was a quarrel, husband and wife fighting. But Dr. Kenneth said that he feels there's more to that. He was obviously fishing. He said, aren't Edgar and Heathcliff kind of close lately? And we all know that Dr. Kenneth knew for a fact that it was Catherine and Heathcliff who were close. I mean, Dr. Kenneth has been the family doctor for generations. And so Mrs. Dean said, no. And Mrs. Dean, we all know, is a little gossip too. She elaborated. She said, well, at least Heathcliff will not be paying anybody a visit anymore in this house. Heathcliff has just been banned from Thrushcross Grange because he was starting to make some moves on Isabella. And so Dr. Kenneth was like, what's up? Doesn't Isabella like Heathcliff back? Which is again sneaky. because Dr. Kenneth already knew the answer to that, because the next thing he said was, "Actually, I heard from people in town that someone saw Isabella and Heathcliff together yesterday, and someone overheard that Heathcliff asked Isabella to run away with him. And Isabella said no at the time, but she said she would be ready next time to run away with Heathcliff." And with that, the puppy on the hook and the sound of hooves flashed across Mrs. Dean's mind. She immediately tore herself from Dr. Kenneth and she ran. She ran up the stairs to Isabella's room, and when she opened the door, it was empty. Isabella was gone. And that's part 4. See you in part 5.